I thought I knew my life. I thought I knew my wife. I thought I knew my best friend. And I thought I knew whose eyes my daughter had inherited, because everyone told me, every single person who held her in the hospital the day she was born, that she had my eyes. Dark brown, almost black, with a ring of amber around the pupil that catches the light at certain angles. "She's got your eyes, Ryan," my mother said. "She's got your eyes," Megan whispered, holding Lily against her chest, her face glowing with the kind of radiance that only new mothers possess. And for 6 years, every time I looked at my daughter, I saw myself looking back. I was wrong about all of it. Every single thing I believed about my life turned out to be a lie so elaborate, so sustained, and so perfectly maintained that when the truth finally arrived, it did not come as a crack in the foundation. It came as the revelation that there had never been a foundation at all. My name is Ryan Callahan, and at 38 years old, I was the kind of man that most people would describe as having figured it out. I owned Callahan Landscaping and Design, a commercial landscaping company that I had built from a single pickup truck and a borrowed lawnmower into a business that generated $3.5 million in annual revenue. I had 27 employees, a fleet of 14 trucks, and contracts with shopping centers, office parks, and gated communities across 3 counties in northern Georgia. I had started the company at 26 with $8,000 in savings and the stubborn belief that if you worked harder than everyone else and treated your clients like family, the money would follow. And it had. Not overnight, not without setbacks, but steadily and consistently, the way a river carves a canyon. I was not rich by any standard that would impress a Wall Street banker, but I had built something real with my hands and my name, and I was proud of it in the quiet, unglamorous way that men who work outside for a living tend to be proud of things. I met Megan at a friend's wedding when I was 27 and she was 25, and I married her 11 months later because I had never met anyone who made me feel so completely understood. She was beautiful in a way that I still struggle to describe without sounding like a greeting card. Auburn hair that she wore past her shoulders, green eyes that narrowed when she laughed, and a voice that could make even the most mundane sentence sound like it contained a secret meant only for you. She was also smart, organized, and devastatingly competent at managing the parts of life that I was terrible at: bills, insurance, social calendars, tax documents, doctor's appointments, school registrations, the entire invisible architecture of adult existence that kept everything from collapsing. She tracked our spending in a spreadsheet that she updated every Sunday morning with her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose and a cup of Earl Grey at her elbow. She negotiated our car insurance down by $400 a year. She remembered every anniversary, every birthday, every teacher's name at Lily's school. She was, in every visible respect, the engine that kept our household running while I was out running the business. I handled the commercial contracts, the crews, the equipment. She handled everything else. It was a division of labor that worked beautifully for 10 years, and it also meant that she had sole, unchallenged access to every financial lever in our personal life, a fact that would become significant later in ways that I could not have predicted and that she had been counting on from the beginning. It was a division of labor that worked beautifully for 10 years, or at least it appeared to work beautifully, which I now understand is not the same thing. Tyler Brannigan had been my best friend since freshman orientation at the University of Georgia, when we were both 18 years old and convinced that we were immortal. We had been roommates for 3 years, groomsmen at each other's imaginary weddings that we planned during late-night dorm room conversations, and eventually the real groomsmen at my actual wedding, where Tyler gave a toast that made my mother cry and my father shake his hand with both hands, the way men do when words are not enough. Tyler was the godfather of my daughter. He came to dinner at our house every Sunday. He borrowed my tools and never returned them, crashed on my couch after football games, and texted me memes at 2 a.m. that were never as funny as he thought they were. He was family in every way that mattered, or at least in every way that I thought mattered, which, again, turned out to be an entirely different thing. The DNA test was Megan's idea, which is the kind of irony that keeps me awake at 3 a.m, even now. I have thought about this 1,000 times since, and the only explanation that makes sense is that Megan did not understand how the DNA relatives feature worked. She thought the kit was just an ancestry breakdown, percentages of British and Irish and Scandinavian, a colorful pie chart for a 6-year-old's birthday. She did not realize that when you test a parent and a child on the same platform, the system automatically compares their genetic profiles and flags paternity matches, or, in our case, the absence of one. It was late September, and Lily's 7th birthday was coming up in November. Megan suggested we get her a MyHeritage DNA kit as a fun gift, something to explore her heritage and maybe find distant relatives. It would be educational, Megan said. She's learning about family trees in school. I thought it was a great idea. I ordered a kit for Lily and one for myself because the results were more interesting when you could compare them to a parent's profile. I swabbed the inside of my cheek, helped Lily swab hers while she giggled and tried to eat the cotton swab, and mailed both kits back to the lab in their prepaid envelopes. 6 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning in early November, I opened the results on my phone while sitting in the parking lot of a Home Depot where I was picking up irrigation supplies. Lily's ancestry composition loaded first. 62% British and Irish, 18% German and French, 12% Scandinavian, 8% broadly European. Then I scrolled down to the section labeled DNA Relatives, expecting to see my name at the top of the list with a match percentage of approximately 50%, the standard number for a parent-child relationship. My name was not there. The screen showed 0 DNA relatives in common between my profile and Lily's. Not a reduced percentage, not a partial match that might indicate a half-sibling or an uncle. 0. The system had analyzed our genetic data and concluded that Ryan Callahan and Lily Callahan shared no meaningful genetic relationship whatsoever. I stared at the screen for a long time. The parking lot of the Home Depot seemed to stretch and flatten around me, the way the world does in those moments when reality shifts and your brain has not yet caught up. I closed the app, reopened it, and checked again. The result had not changed. I drove home without buying the irrigation supplies, sat in the driveway for 20 minutes, and then went inside and told Megan I had a headache and was going to lie down. She brought me 2 ibuprofen and a glass of water and kissed my forehead, and I took the pills from the hand of a woman who, I was beginning to realize, I might not know at all. I did not confront Megan. Not yet. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to walk downstairs, put the DNA results on the kitchen table, and demand an explanation. But I had spent 12 years running a business, and if there is one thing that running a business teaches you, it is that decisions made in the first 30 seconds of a crisis are almost always the wrong decisions. So I lay on the bed, and I stared at the ceiling fan, and I counted its rotations, one after another, until my breathing slowed and my pulse dropped below 100. And I made myself think instead of feel. If I confronted Megan now, she would cry. She would deny. She would gaslight me, accuse me of paranoia, demand to see the results, and then claim the test was faulty. And if there was something larger going on, something I could not yet see, she would have time to hide it, delete it, destroy it. I had read enough stories on Reddit and legal forums to know that confronting a potentially unfaithful spouse without evidence was the fastest way to lose control of the situation and the worst possible move in a potential divorce. Instead, I spent the next 72 hours in a state of controlled devastation, going through the motions of my daily life while my mind worked through the implications of what the test had revealed. There were 3 possible explanations. The first was a lab error, which I wanted to believe so badly that I could feel the desire as a physical ache in my chest. The second was that Lily had been switched at birth, a scenario so statistically improbable that it bordered on fantasy. The third was that Megan had conceived Lily with another man and had either not known, or worse, had known and had chosen to let me believe the child was mine. I ordered a second DNA test from a different company, a legally admissible paternity test from an AABB-accredited laboratory that required chain of custody documentation. I collected Lily's sample by telling her we were going to do another fun science experiment, and I mailed it with mine. I stood at the mailbox for a long time, holding the prepaid envelope, aware that I was about to send away a piece of my daughter's DNA and a piece of mine, and that when the results came back, one of two things would be true. Either the first test was wrong and my world would snap back to normal, or the first test was right and nothing in my life would ever be normal again. I mailed it anyway, because not knowing was no longer an option. The weeks that followed were the loneliest of my life. I could not tell anyone what I was going through, not my mother, not my brother, not my crew foreman Danny, who had been my closest confidant for 12 years. I carried the secret inside me the way you carry a stone in your pocket, aware of its weight with every step, unable to put it down, unable to show it to anyone. The results arrived 8 days later, on a Tuesday morning, in a white envelope with a laboratory return address that I opened in the parking lot of a gas station because I could not bring myself to open it at home, in the house where Megan would be watching, in the house where Lily would be playing, in the house where the answer inside that envelope would rearrange the furniture of my entire existence. I unfolded the single sheet of paper and read the result line 3 times, each time slower than the last, as if reading it more carefully might change the words. Based on the analysis of the genetic markers tested, the alleged father, Ryan J. Callahan, is excluded as the biological father of the child, Lily M. Callahan. The probability of paternity is 0.0%. I folded the paper, put it back in the envelope, put the envelope in the glove compartment, and drove to work. I supervised a crew installing a drainage system at a strip mall in Alpharetta, and I did not think about the letter for approximately 6 minutes out of every hour, and the remaining 54 minutes of every hour, I thought about nothing else. The question that consumed me was not whether Megan had been unfaithful. The DNA results had answered that question with the cold, mathematical finality of a lab report. The question was, with whom, and for how long, and whether the affair was still happening. I began watching Megan's behavior with an attention that I had never applied before, and what I saw filled me with a creeping horror that was somehow worse than the DNA results, because it meant that the signs had been there all along, and I had simply been too trusting, too busy, or too in love to see them. Megan's phone was always face down on the counter. She had recently changed her passcode from our anniversary date to something I did not know. She took her phone into the bathroom every time she showered. She had a weekly girls' night every Thursday that she had been attending for, I now realized, almost exactly 7 years. And she always came home looking not tired from an evening out with friends, but refreshed, almost radiant. The way a person looks after spending time with someone who makes them happy. I had always attributed this to the restorative power of female friendship. I now had a different theory. The worst part, the part that I still have trouble saying out loud, even now, was that I already knew who it was before I found the proof. There is a particular kind of intimacy that develops between people who are sleeping together, a gravitational pull that is invisible to everyone except someone who is looking for it. And once I started looking, I could not unsee it. The way Megan's voice changed when she talked to Tyler on the phone, dropping half an octave into a register she did not use with anyone else. The way Tyler always sat next to Megan at Sunday dinners, their shoulders almost touching, passing dishes with a choreography that suggested they had eaten together many more times than just Sundays. The way Lily ran to Tyler when he arrived at our house, wrapping her arms around his legs with the unself-conscious joy of a child greeting someone she saw far more often than Sunday dinners would account for. I had interpreted all of this as the warmth of a close family friendship. I now interpreted it as evidence. My best friend was sleeping with my wife. My best friend was the biological father of my daughter. And the godfather of my child was her actual father. There was one moment during those 2 weeks of observation that nearly destroyed my composure. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Tyler had come over to watch the Georgia-Florida game. Lily was sitting between us on the couch, wearing a Bulldogs jersey that Tyler had bought her for her 5th birthday. During a commercial break, Lily looked up at Tyler and asked, completely unprompted, "Uncle Tyler, how come your hair is the same color as mine?" Tyler laughed, the easy, practiced laugh of a man who had rehearsed this moment, and said, "Just luck, kiddo. We both got the good stuff." He looked over Lily's head at me and grinned, and I grinned back, and inside my chest something that had been holding me together for 38 years quietly snapped. I excused myself to the garage and sat on the hood of my truck and pressed my fists against my eyes until the impulse to walk back in and destroy Tyler Brannigan's face with the nearest heavy object had passed. It took 4 minutes. Then I went back inside and opened another beer and watched the rest of the game with a smile on my face that felt like it had been applied with a trowel. I confirmed it on the second Thursday of November. I told Megan I had a late job site inspection in Gwinnett County and would not be home until 10. Instead, I parked my truck 3 blocks from the house and waited. At 6:45, Megan's silver Lexus pulled out of the driveway. I followed her at a distance of 4 to 5 car lengths, staying in the right lane, my headlights off when possible. I followed her north on Peachtree Industrial Boulevard, then west on Johnson Ferry Road, then south on Ashford Dunwoody, before she turned onto Peachtree Road, a route that avoided all the main highways and all the intersections where she might have spotted my truck in the rearview mirror. This was not a woman driving to a friend's house. This was a woman who had practiced her route the way a getaway driver practices an escape plan, choosing streets with minimal traffic cameras and maximum distance from anyone who might recognize her car. She drove 17 miles, total, to an apartment complex called the Villas at Brookhaven, a mid-range development on Peachtree Road that I had driven past 100 times without giving it a second thought. She parked in a reserved spot, number 214, took a bottle of wine from the back seat, and walked to a second-floor apartment. The door opened before she knocked. Tyler Brannigan stood in the doorway wearing sweatpants and a University of Georgia t-shirt, the same shirt he had been wearing the day I met him 20 years ago. He put his arm around Megan's waist and pulled her inside, and the door closed behind them. I sat in my truck in the parking lot for 43 minutes, staring at the light in the second-floor window. At one point, the curtain moved, and I could see their silhouettes in the warm light of the apartment, moving around the living room with the casual ease of 2 people who had been doing this for a very long time. There was no urgency in their movements, no furtiveness. They looked like a couple spending a quiet evening at home. And I realized, with a clarity that felt like swallowing broken glass, that they were a couple spending a quiet evening at home. This was their home. Thursday nights were their nights. And Sunday dinners at my house, where Tyler played the devoted friend and Megan played the faithful wife. Those were the performances. This, the Brookhaven apartment with the reserved parking spot and the bottle of wine and the door that opened before she knocked. This was the real life. I was the fiction. I sat there feeling nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not betrayal. Nothing. The absence of emotion was, in its own way, the most terrifying thing I had ever experienced, because it meant that some part of me had already known. I drove home in a silence that felt like the silence after an explosion, the kind where your ears are ringing but no sound is getting through. I parked in the driveway, sat in the truck for another 10 minutes, and then walked into my house and stood in the kitchen where Megan had made dinner 4 hours earlier, where Lily's drawings were held to the refrigerator with alphabet magnets, where the coffee mug that Tyler always used, the one with "World's Best Uncle" printed on it, that Megan had bought him for Christmas 2 years ago, sat clean and dry in the dish rack waiting for Sunday. I picked up the mug, turned it over in my hands, and set it back down. Then I went to the office I kept in the spare bedroom, closed the door, and began examining my company's finances for the first time in years. I had always left the books to Phil Garrett, a 52-year-old CPA I had hired 8 years ago on Tyler's recommendation, a detail that now landed with the weight of a sledgehammer. Phil had always done excellent work, or what I assumed was excellent work, since I had never questioned his numbers. The financial statements he prepared were clean, organized, and consistently showed the company growing at a healthy rate. But I had taken an accounting course in college, and I still remembered enough to know where to look. I logged into QuickBooks using the admin credentials that Phil had set up for me years ago and never changed, and I started pulling up the vendor payment reports for the past 3 years. What I found made the DNA results feel like a minor inconvenience. There were 3 vendor accounts that I did not recognize. The first was called Summit Materials Supply LLC, which had been receiving payments averaging $4,200 per month for the past 7 years. The second was Peachtree Grading Solutions LLC, receiving approximately $3,800 per month for the same period. The third was BGT Consulting LLC, receiving roughly $2,600 per month for 7 years. I searched for all 3 companies in the Georgia Secretary of State's business registry. All 3 had been registered using anonymous registered agent services, the kind you can hire for $50 online, which meant the public filings did not show any personal names. But they did show addresses. Summit Materials Supply listed a UPS mailbox store in Alpharetta as its principal office. BGT Consulting listed a P.O. box in Marietta. And Peachtree Grading Solutions listed a residential address in Brookhaven. I stared at that address on my screen and felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise. I knew that address. I had parked across the street from it 3 hours earlier and watched my wife carry a bottle of wine through its front door. Tyler's apartment was not just his love nest. It was the registered office of one of the companies that had been draining my business for 7 years. He was literally living in a home that my stolen money was paying for, sleeping with my wife in rooms that my labor had furnished. The anonymous agent services hid the owners' names from the public registry, but I already knew enough. A shell company registered at my best friend's apartment, receiving monthly payments from my business for work it never performed, was not a coincidence. It was a conspiracy, and I was starting to see its full shape. I opened a calculator and added up the total payments across all 3 vendors. The number was $891,400. I sat in my office chair and stared at the number on the screen. $891,000. Stolen from me by 3 people I trusted more than anyone in the world. Stolen in amounts small enough to never trigger my attention, from a business profitable enough that I never noticed the missing margin. Phil had been the architect, creating invoices from phantom companies for materials and services that were never delivered. Megan had been the banker, funneling her share through BGT Consulting into accounts I had no visibility into. And Tyler had been the beneficiary, living comfortably in his Brookhaven apartment on money that I had earned laying sod, planting trees, and building retaining walls in the Georgia heat. I thought about the time Tyler told me he was between jobs, and I had offered to loan him money. He had declined, saying he had some savings. I thought about the time Phil had told me that material costs were up 15% due to supply chain issues, and I had nodded and signed the checks without looking twice. Phil always brought me the payment stack on Friday afternoons, 40 or 50 invoices bundled together from legitimate suppliers like Site 1 Landscape Supply and Belgard, with the phantom invoices buried in the middle of the pile, positioned between real vendors whose names I recognized. He knew that by Friday evening I was tired from a week of managing crews, and that I signed the entire stack in a single session, trusting that Phil had already verified each one. It was a small, clever exploitation of a routine I had never thought to question. I thought about every Sunday dinner where Tyler sat at my table, ate food bought with my money, played with the daughter he had fathered with my wife, and called me brother. The numbness that I had felt in the parking lot was gone now, replaced by a fury so clean and so complete that it felt almost holy, like a fire that burns hot enough to turn everything to glass. I sat in my office chair until 4 in the morning, scrolling through 7 years of invoices, watching the money flow out of my company like blood from a wound I never knew I had. I thought about the years I had worked 14-hour days in the Georgia heat, the weekends I had missed, the vacations I had cut short, the nights I had come home covered in dirt and sweat and told Megan that it was all going to pay off, that we were building something. And we were building something. I just was not part of it. I did not make the mistake of confronting anyone. I did not call Megan a liar. I did not drive to Tyler's apartment and put my fist through his door. I did not fire Phil Garrett and watch him clean out his desk. Those would have been satisfying actions, but they would have been stupid actions, and I was done being stupid. I was done trusting blindly, done assuming that love was a shield against betrayal, done believing that the people who ate at my table and slept in my bed and played with my daughter were incapable of looking me in the eye and stealing my life out from under me. Instead, I called a lawyer named David Keene, a man I had met at a Chamber of Commerce event 2 years earlier who specialized in commercial fraud and forensic accounting. I sat in his office the next morning at 8 o'clock and laid everything out. The DNA results, the Thursday surveillance, the vendor payment records, the shell company registrations. David listened without interrupting, which I appreciated, and when I was finished, he said 3 things. First, do not confront anyone. Second, do not change anything about your behavior. Third, we need a forensic accountant before we go to the police. He recommended a firm called Whitaker & Associates, headed by a woman named Claire Whitaker, who had spent 15 years at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division before going private. Claire, David said, was the kind of person who could find a stolen penny in a mountain of quarters. I met Claire Whitaker for the first time in David Keene's conference room, and she was exactly the kind of person you want on your side when your life has been dismantled by people who thought they were smarter than you. She was 51 years old, wore wire-rimmed glasses, and spoke with the quiet precision of someone who spent 15 years at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, auditing the financial lives of people who believed their schemes were undetectable. She had the demeanor of a chess player and the patience of a sniper, and when I finished explaining what I had found in QuickBooks, she nodded once and said, "Mr. Callahan, what you've described is a textbook vendor fraud scheme. The good news is that these schemes always leave trails because every dollar has to go somewhere, and somewhere always has a receipt." I liked her immediately. Claire was in my office 3 days later with 2 junior analysts and a portable hard drive. She imaged Phil's work computer, downloaded 7 years of QuickBooks data, and began the kind of forensic autopsy of my company's finances that left no invoice unexamined, no deposit untraced, and no discrepancy unexplained. It took her team 3 weeks of 16-hour days, during which Claire and her analysts occupied a small conference room at David's law firm that they converted into what Claire called the war room, with printouts covering every wall and a whiteboard timeline that tracked the money from my company's bank account through the shell companies and into the personal accounts of the 3 people who were systematically dismantling my financial life. I visited the war room twice during those 3 weeks, and both times I felt like I was looking at the X-ray of a disease I never knew I had. Claire had a habit of marking confirmed fraudulent transactions with a red dot, and by the end of the 2nd week, the wall of printouts looked like it had developed a rash. The report she delivered was 47 pages long, bound in a blue cover with a simple title: Forensic Accounting Analysis, Callahan Landscaping and Design, Vendor Payment Irregularities, 2019 to 2025. And it read like a criminal indictment. Summit Materials Supply had never supplied a single bag of mulch, a single pallet of flagstone, or a single load of topsoil to any job site operated by Callahan Landscaping. Every invoice was fabricated, every purchase order forged, every delivery confirmation signed by Phil Garrett himself using a fictitious name. Peachtree Grading Solutions had never graded a single lot. BGT Consulting had never consulted on anything. The total amount diverted through the 3 entities over 7 years was $891,412. Claire had traced the money through a network of accounts, from the shell companies to personal accounts held by Megan, Tyler, and Phil, then outward to car payments, rent, luxury purchases, and most damningly, to a joint savings account at a credit union in Alpharetta held in the names of Megan L. Callahan and Tyler M. Brannigan, with a current balance of $114,000. They had been building a future together, with my money. The most painful page in Claire's report was page 31, which documented a series of Zelle transfers from Megan's personal account to Tyler's personal account, labeled in the memo field with a single word: Lily. Megan had been sending Tyler $500 per month for 6 years, labeled with our daughter's name, presumably as informal child support for the child they both knew was his. She had been paying the biological father of my daughter to be her father, using money that I earned, while I drove to soccer practice and read bedtime stories and sat up all night when Lily had the flu, believing with every fiber of my being that she was mine. I want to be clear about something. I love Lily. I loved her the day she was born. I loved her the day I read the DNA results, and I love her now. Biology does not determine fatherhood. 6 years of diaper changes, nightmares, first words, first steps, scraped knees, and bedtime stories determine fatherhood. Lily is my daughter. What the DNA test revealed was not that I had lost a daughter. It revealed that I had been robbed of the truth. Armed with Claire's report, David and I went to the Fulton County District Attorney's office on a Wednesday morning and presented the case to an assistant DA named Patricia Morales. We brought the forensic accounting report, the shell company registrations, the bank records, the QuickBooks data, the fabricated invoices, the joint account statements, and the DNA test results, which were relevant because they established the nature of the relationship between Megan and Tyler and provided context for the financial conspiracy. ADA Morales was a former public defender who had switched to the prosecution side 6 years ago, and David told me later that she had a particular contempt for financial crimes committed by people who exploited positions of trust. We brought her the evidence we had gathered legally from within my own company: the QuickBooks data, the fabricated invoices, the vendor addresses matching Tyler's apartment, and Claire's forensic analysis showing that no materials or services had ever been delivered. We explained that the shell company's bank records would confirm the identities of the account holders and complete the picture, but that those records could only be obtained through criminal process. Morales understood immediately. She reviewed the materials for 2 days, during which I slept approximately 4 hours total, because the idea that the case might be rejected or downgraded to a misdemeanor was a possibility I could not stop running through my mind on a continuous loop. On the 3rd day, she called David to say that her office was opening a criminal investigation and would be issuing criminal subpoenas for the bank records of all 3 shell companies, which would reveal the account holders and the money trail. Once those records confirmed what Claire's internal analysis had already shown, Morales would seek arrest warrants for all 3 defendants on charges of theft by taking exceeding $500,000, which was a felony in the state of Georgia, carrying a sentence of 5 to 20 years, plus additional charges of forgery, money laundering, identity fraud for the fictitious vendor identities, and conspiracy. She also referred the case to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division because the income from the shell companies had never been reported on anyone's tax returns, which added federal tax evasion charges to the growing list. While the legal machinery was grinding into motion, something unexpected happened that almost derailed everything. Tyler called me on a Wednesday evening, his voice carrying an edge I had never heard before. "Hey, brother, quick question. Did you change your QuickBooks password recently? Phil says he's having trouble logging in." My blood went cold. Claire's team had accessed the system using my admin credentials, and it was possible that their activity had triggered a security notification or that Phil had noticed unfamiliar login timestamps in the audit log. I forced my voice into a tone of casual irritation and said, "Yeah, I changed a bunch of passwords last week. IT guy said we had some phishing attempts. Tell Phil to email me, and I'll send him the new one." Tyler said, "Cool, will do," and hung up. I immediately called David Keene, who called Claire Whitaker, who confirmed that her team had already exported all necessary data and no longer needed system access. The close call accelerated the timeline. Claire finished her report 4 days later instead of the original 2-week estimate, working her team through a weekend to ensure every transaction was documented before Phil had a chance to alter the records. I spent the 2 weeks before the arrests living the strangest double life I have ever experienced. I went to work every day, running my crews, reviewing bids, meeting with clients, performing the role of a man whose life was proceeding normally. I came home every evening, kissed Megan on the cheek, asked about her day, and listened to answers that I now understood were carefully curated fiction. I ate dinner with Megan and Lily, and I watched my wife's face for the micro-expressions that I had spent 6 years not seeing. The slight tightening around her eyes when her phone buzzed during dinner, the practiced smoothness with which she turned it face down, the way she checked the time at 8:30 every Thursday with the unconscious reflex of a person who has an appointment she cannot miss. I watched television with my wife. I exchanged text messages with Tyler about the Georgia Bulldogs' playoff chances, and each time I typed LOL or for sure in response to one of his messages, I felt like I was swallowing a mouthful of broken glass. I reviewed financial statements prepared by Phil Garrett and signed them without comment, knowing that behind every number on those pages was a lie that I could now identify by page, line, and dollar amount. I went to Tyler's apartment once during this period, when he invited me over to watch a UFC fight on a Saturday night. I sat on his couch, the same couch where I now knew my wife sat every Thursday, and I drank his beer, and I watched him move through his apartment with the comfortable familiarity of a man who had been living there for years, a man whose rent was paid by my company's stolen revenue. On his kitchen counter, I noticed a small ceramic dish that I recognized because Megan had an identical one at home, a set of matching dishes from a pottery class she had taken 3 years ago that she told me was a girls' weekend workshop, but that I now suspected had been a weekend with Tyler. Every night I lay in bed next to the woman who had betrayed me in every way a person can be betrayed, and I listened to her breathing slow as she fell asleep, and I stared at the dark ceiling and thought about the 47-page report sitting in David Keene's office safe, every page a nail in the coffin of the life I had thought was mine. I was an actor in a play that I had not written, performing the role of a man who did not know that his world was about to end. And I gave the performance of my life, because every normal day that passed was another day of evidence being gathered, warrants being prepared, and cases being built. The only moment I nearly broke was on a Sunday evening when Tyler was at our house for dinner, and Lily climbed into his lap and said, "Uncle Tyler, will you read me a story?" Tyler looked at Megan, and Megan looked at Tyler, and something passed between them that I had seen 1,000 times before and never understood until now. It was not the look of friends. It was the look of parents. I excused myself to the bathroom, gripped the edges of the sink, and stared at my reflection until I was certain I could go back out there and smile. The arrests happened on a Tuesday morning in December, 3 days before Lily's 7th birthday, a timing coincidence that I had begged ADA Morales to avoid, but that the logistics of coordinating 3 simultaneous arrests made unavoidable. At 6:30 in the morning, 2 detectives from the Fulton County Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit arrived at my house with an arrest warrant for Megan Callahan. I had taken Lily to my parents' house the night before, telling Megan that my mother wanted to have a special sleepover with her granddaughter. Megan was in the kitchen making coffee when the detectives knocked. She opened the door, read the warrant, and looked at me with an expression that I will never forget. It was not guilt. It was not surprise. It was calculation. She was already running scenarios, evaluating options, constructing narratives. "You don't know what you're doing, Ryan," she said as they handcuffed her. "This is going to destroy Lily. Think about Lily." It was the cruelest thing she could have said, and she knew it, because Lily was the one weapon she still had and the one vulnerability I could not armor against. I looked at the woman I had married 10 years ago, the woman whose face I had memorized in the dark on 1,000 nights, the woman who had whispered, "She's got your eyes," while handing me a child she knew was not mine, and I said, "Everything I am doing because of Lily." The detectives led her to the patrol car. She did not look back. Tyler Brannigan was arrested at his apartment in Brookhaven 40 minutes later. According to the arresting officers, he answered the door in the same University of Georgia sweatpants and attempted to close it when he saw their badges. He was not fast enough. The officers later told me that Tyler said only one thing during the entire booking process: "I need to call Ryan." He never called. I would not have answered if he had. Phil Garrett was arrested at his home in Marietta at 7:15 that morning. Unlike Megan's cold composure and Tyler's panicked flight, Phil's arrest was defined by a different emotion entirely: relief. According to the arresting officers, when they showed Phil the warrant and explained the charges, he closed his eyes, exhaled, and said, "I've been waiting for this for 3 years." His wife, Linda, who knew nothing about the scheme and who had been married to Phil for 26 years, collapsed in the doorway of their living room and had to be attended to by a neighbor who heard the commotion. Phil later told investigators that the guilt of the fraud had been destroying him for years, that he had wanted to confess multiple times, but was afraid of what Megan and Tyler would do if he talked, and that the only thing keeping him in the conspiracy was the certainty that if he walked away, they would find a way to make him the sole scapegoat. I do not know whether I believe Phil's remorse, but I know that on the day he was sentenced, he turned to me in the courtroom and said, "I'm sorry, Ryan. You deserved a better accountant and a better friend." I nodded but said nothing, because an apology delivered after a conviction is not an apology. It is a performance. The months between the arrests and the trial were the longest of my life. I hired a full-time nanny named Angela to help with Lily while I managed the business and navigated the legal process. I started seeing a therapist named Dr. Marcus Webb, a former military psychologist who specialized in trauma and betrayal, and who told me during our second session something that I have thought about every day since. "Ryan, what happened to you is not a failure of judgment. It is a failure of other people to deserve the trust you gave them. You are not naive for trusting your wife and your best friend. They are criminal for exploiting that trust." Those words did not fix anything, but they gave me permission to stop blaming myself for not seeing what 3 people had worked very hard for 7 years to hide from me. The trial took place the following spring in Fulton County Superior Court. The courtroom was full every day. My employees came, my clients came. Tyler's ex-wife came, a woman named Jennifer who I had never met, but who approached me in the hallway during a recess and said, "He did something similar to me on a smaller scale. I'm glad someone finally held him accountable." That sentence, spoken by a stranger who had been through her own version of my nightmare, meant more to me than she will probably ever know. The prosecution presented Claire Whitaker's forensic report, the shell company records, the bank statements, the fabricated invoices, the QuickBooks audit trail, the DNA test results, and the testimony of 16 witnesses, including 3 Callahan landscaping employees who confirmed that they had never seen a truck from Summit Materials Supply, Peachtree Grading Solutions, or BGT Consulting at any job site in the company's history. Claire Whitaker herself spent 4 hours on the stand, walking the jury through every fraudulent transaction with the patient, methodical precision of a woman who had spent 15 years at the IRS and had seen far worse, but never anything quite this personal. The defense tried 3 different strategies. Megan's attorney argued that Megan had been financially unsophisticated and had simply signed documents that Phil presented to her without understanding their significance. This argument was dismantled by the prosecution's introduction of text messages between Megan and Phil that showed Megan actively directing the amounts, timing, and routing of payments, including a message that read, "Keep November under $8,000 total across all three. Ryan's doing year-end review." Tyler's attorney argued that Tyler had received the Peachtree grading payments as legitimate consulting fees for advice he provided to the landscaping company. This argument lasted approximately 12 minutes before the prosecution asked Tyler to name a single project he had consulted on. He could not name a single project. He could not name a single employee he had worked with. He could not name a single deliverable he had produced. The courtroom was silent as Tyler sat in the witness box and failed, for the 6th consecutive time, to provide any evidence that Peachtree Grading Solutions had ever performed a single hour of legitimate work. Phil's attorney attempted a plea of diminished responsibility, claiming that Phil had been coerced by Megan and Tyler. This claim was contradicted by Phil's own spreadsheets, which showed that he had designed the shell company structure, selected the vendor categories most difficult to audit, specifically choosing bulk materials like mulch, topsoil, and gravel, where exact quantities were impossible to verify from invoices alone, and calibrated the monthly amounts to stay below the threshold that would trigger my attention. The prosecution also introduced testimony from 2 of my employees, my operations manager Carlos Vega and my senior foreman Danny Mitchell, who both confirmed under oath that in 12 years of working for Callahan Landscaping, they had never received a single delivery from Summit Materials Supply, had never seen a Peachtree grading crew on any job site, and had never heard of BGT Consulting. Danny, who had been with me since the first year, looked at me from the witness stand with an expression of bewildered loyalty and said, "Ryan runs a clean operation. If someone was stealing from him, they had to be smart about it, because Ryan knows every dollar that comes in and out." Except, of course, I had not known. I had trusted Phil to know for me. The jury deliberated for 9 hours across 2 days. During those 9 hours, I sat in the hallway outside the courtroom with David Keene, drinking bad coffee from a vending machine and saying almost nothing. Either the jury would see what I had seen, or they would not, and no amount of hallway conversation would change the outcome. When the bailiff opened the door and told us the jury had reached a verdict, I walked back into the courtroom and felt my heart beating in my throat like a trapped bird. The foreperson, a middle-aged woman in a blue blazer, stood and read the verdicts one by one, and each guilty landed in the courtroom like a stone dropped into still water. They returned guilty verdicts on all counts for all 3 defendants. Megan Callahan was found guilty of theft by taking, forgery, money laundering, and conspiracy, and was sentenced to 12 years in state prison. The judge, an older man named the Honorable William Ashford, who had presided over Fulton County financial crimes for 22 years, told Megan during sentencing, "You did not merely steal from your husband's business. You constructed an elaborate parallel life funded by his labor, maintained by his trust, and concealed behind the face of a loving marriage. The duration, the sophistication, and the cruelty of this deception place it among the most egregious cases of marital fraud this court has encountered." Tyler Brannigan received 10 years for theft by taking, money laundering, and conspiracy. He showed no visible emotion when the sentence was read. Phil Garrett received 8 years for theft by taking, forgery, and conspiracy, plus an additional 2 years for federal tax evasion charges that were tried separately in the Northern District of Georgia. His CPA license was permanently revoked by the Georgia State Board of Accountancy. I sat in the courtroom for all of it. I sat there when the prosecution played the text messages. I sat there when Claire Whitaker traced every dollar with the methodical certainty of a cartographer mapping a river from its mouth to its source. I sat there when Megan took the stand in her own defense, which her attorney had advised against, and told the jury that I had been an absent husband, a workaholic who cared more about his lawnmowers than his family, and that she had turned to Tyler for the emotional support I failed to provide. I sat there and listened to my wife rewrite the history of our marriage for 12 strangers in a jury box, and I felt something inside me that was not anger and not sadness, but a kind of exhausted clarity. Like the moment after a fever breaks and you can suddenly see the room clearly for the first time in days. When it was my turn to give a victim impact statement, I stood at the podium and looked at Megan and Tyler and Phil, all three of them at the defense table, and I said, "I trusted you with my business, my friendship, and my family. You took all three. You stole $891,000 from a company I built with my hands. You stole the truth about my daughter's parentage and let me live in ignorance for 6 years. And you sat at my dinner table every Sunday, looked me in the eye, and called me brother." I paused and looked at Tyler. "You were my best friend for 20 years. I stood next to you at my wedding, and you stood next to me. I named you the godfather of a child you knew was yours. I lent you money when you said you were struggling, and you took it from a man you were already robbing. I would have given you anything you asked for. A loan, a job, a place to stay, anything. You didn't have to steal it. But you did, because stealing was easier than asking, and because you believed I would never find out." I looked at Phil. "And you. I gave you a job, and I trusted you with the one part of my business I could not do myself. You repaid that trust with 7 years of forged invoices and phantom companies. You weren't coerced. You were compensated." I stepped back from the podium and looked at the judge. "I am not here for sympathy. I am here because the record should reflect what these three people did, not to a company or a bank account, but to a family. They did not just steal money. They stole a man's fatherhood, his friendship, and his faith in the people he loved. And they did it with a smile." The aftermath was the hardest part. Harder than the discovery, harder than the investigation, harder even than the trial. Because the aftermath was where I had to figure out how to be a person again, without the architecture of lies that had secretly been holding my life in shape. I filed for divorce, which was granted on grounds of adultery and criminal fraud, and I was awarded full custody of Lily, a decision that Megan did not contest from prison. The court ordered restitution of the full $891,000, though David Keene told me privately that I would likely recover less than half, since Megan, Tyler, and Phil had spent most of the stolen money on rent, cars, travel, and the quiet luxury of people who believed they would never be caught. The joint savings account containing $114,000 was seized and returned to me. I used part of it to hire a new accountant, a woman named Rosa Chen, who came with a recommendation from Claire Whitaker herself, and who installed financial controls so tight that every payment over $500 now required my personal digital signature. Every vendor went through a 3-step verification process before being added to the system, and every quarterly statement was cross-referenced against bank records by an independent auditor. It was the kind of system I should have had from the beginning, the kind of system that would have caught Phil's phantom vendors in their first month. But hindsight is not a tool you can use to build. It is only a light you can use to see what you missed in the dark. The company survived, which was not guaranteed. When news of the embezzlement became public through local media coverage of the trial, 3 of my clients called to express concern about the stability of my operation. I met with each of them personally, showed them the new financial controls that Rosa had implemented, and told them the truth. I had been betrayed by people I trusted. I had discovered it. I had prosecuted it, and my company was now run more tightly than it had ever been. All 3 renewed their contracts. 2 of them increased the scope of their agreements. One of them, the facilities director of a medical campus in Dunwoody, told me that my handling of the situation had actually increased his confidence in my company. "A man who can take a hit like that and keep building," he said, "that's a man I want managing my grounds." I thanked him, shook his hand, and went to my truck and sat in the driver's seat for 5 minutes before I trusted my voice enough to make the next phone call. I sold the house on Piedmont Road. I could not sleep there anymore. Not in the bedroom where Megan had answered Tyler's texts at 2 in the morning while I lay beside her. Not at the dinner table where Tyler had sat every Sunday and smiled at me across the wreckage of my life. Lily and I moved to a smaller house in Roswell, a 3-bedroom craftsman with a big backyard and a tire swing that I hung from an oak tree the day we moved in. I told Lily about the divorce in language that a 7-year-old could understand. Mommy made some bad choices, and she has to go away for a while, but it has nothing to do with you, and I love you more than anything in the world. Lily cried, and I held her, and I made her a promise that I have kept every single day since, that no matter what happened, no matter what she learned about her biology when she was old enough to understand, I would always be her father, because fatherhood is not a test result. It is a choice you make every morning when you wake up, and it is a choice I will keep making for the rest of my life. Lily asked about her mother every day for the first 3 months, then every week, then every other week, and then, gradually, the questions became less frequent, replaced by a quiet acceptance that children are capable of in ways that adults are not. I took her to see Megan once, at the prison's family visitation center, because my therapist said it was important for Lily to understand that her mother still existed and still loved her, even if that love had been twisted and compromised by choices that Lily was too young to comprehend. The visit lasted 45 minutes. Megan cried the entire time. Lily drew her a picture of a house with a tire swing and said, "This is our new house, Mommy. Daddy hung the swing for me." Megan looked at the drawing and then looked at me over Lily's head, and for the first time since the arrest, I saw something in her eyes that was not calculation or defiance, but genuine, unmanufactured grief. I did not feel sorry for her, but I acknowledged, privately and only to myself, that the woman sitting across from us in the orange jumpsuit was in pain, and that some small part of that pain was earned by the love she had felt for the daughter she had created with another man while pretending to build a family with me. Love is complicated. Betrayal is simple. But the space between them is where most of real life happens. My mother asked me once, about 6 months after the trial, whether I wished I had never ordered that DNA test. Whether ignorance, in this case, might have been preferable to the truth. I thought about the question for a long time, standing at the kitchen window of my new house, watching Lily spin on the tire swing in lazy circles, her dark hair catching the light, her laughter carrying across the yard like music from a distant room. It was a fair question. There are days, even now, when I wish I did not know what I know. Days when I catch myself reaching for my phone to text Tyler about a game and remembering, half a second later, that the person I would be texting is serving 10 years for stealing from me. Days when Lily asks why Mommy cannot come to her school play, and I have to construct an answer that protects her from a truth she is not yet old enough to carry. Ignorance would have been painless. But ignorance would also have been fatal, not to me physically, but to everything I had built and everything I believed about myself. I thought about the $891,000 that would have continued to drain from my company until there was nothing left. I thought about the parallel life that Megan and Tyler were building with my money, a life that would eventually have replaced mine entirely. I thought about Lily growing up in a household built on deception, absorbing the lesson that love is something you perform rather than something you give. And I said, no. The truth cost me my marriage, my best friend, and 6 years of believing a lie. But it gave me something more important. It gave me back the ability to trust myself, because now I know that when the evidence is in front of me, I will act on it. I will not look away. My mother nodded, and we sat on the porch of my new house in Roswell and watched Lily swing on the tire swing in the October light, her dark brown eyes catching the afternoon sun with that ring of amber that everyone always said she got from me. And maybe she did, in a way. Not through genetics, but through 6 years of watching me, learning from me, becoming the person I was trying to teach her to be. Because the truth that I have come to understand, the truth that no DNA test can measure and no courtroom can adjudicate, is that parenthood is not a matter of chromosomes. It is a matter of presence. It is every bedtime story, every scraped knee, every nightmare that sends a small person running down the hallway to find the one person in the world who can make the darkness go away. I am that person for Lily. I have always been that person. And no test result, no betrayal, no amount of stolen money will ever change that. Justice had been served. The guilty were punished. The innocent were healing. And we had made it through, together. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. We will see you in the next one.